Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The statistics can't replace the individual stories, the tragedies and the losses of knife crime. Nevertheless, the numbers are important to help us understand the scale of the problem and what changes we're actually seeing away from the headlines. Ben Chu has been looking at just how they break down.
We are suffering from a knife crime epidemic. That's what the headlines tell us. But what do the statistics say? Offences involving a knife are at a record level in England and Wales, according to police crime data, with 40,000 recorded in the year to March 2018. Even so, we should bear some context in mind. The number of knife homicides, up until last year, was not out of line with the historical norm of the past 4 decades. Accepting that there is a short-term spike, why is it happening? There's a plethora of suspects. First, police cuts. Last year there were 122,400 police officers in England and Wales, 15% fewer than in 2010. The police say that this decline in manpower is linked to the increase in knife crime. A leaked Home Office document seemed to support this last year when it noted that this was unlikely to be the factor that triggered the shift in serious violence, but may be an underlying driver that has allowed the rise to continue. Second, the government's austerity agenda. In London, there has been a 36% reduction in youth service budgets since 2012, and a similar story nationwide. This has been blamed for alienating youngsters, pushing them into the arms of gangs. However, knife crime spikes can also occur when public spending is rising, as happened in Glasgow in the 2000s, which became the murder capital of Europe in 2005. Sharp instruments were the most common murder weapon, accounting for half of the total in that year. Third, reduced use of stop and search. Rates slumped after 2010. Some are now clamouring for the policing tactic to be brought back. However, a 2016 study of a previous Met Police initiative concluded a large increase in weapon searches was found to have no impact on police recorded crime at the borough level. Fourth, school exclusions. The former Met boss Lord Hogan Howe argues that exclusions can drive young people into knife crime. Yet permanent exclusions fell by 87% between 2006 and 2014, prompting the Ministry of Justice to conclude that they cannot be a major short-term driver of knife possession offences. Exclusions have picked up more recently, but not enough to be the sole driver of the spike in knife crime. Other suspects range from the plausible, structural changes in the drugs trade, to the speculative, rising social media use, to the doubtful, malign culture and family breakdown. The picture is complex, and no one factor is likely to be the sole culprit.
Well, I'm joined now by the rapper and author Akala, whose 2018 book Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire looked at how a young child can turn into a knife-carrying teenager. I first met you at the Grenfell disaster, and you were extraordinarily insightful as to what was going on there. And I'm wondering now, perhaps developing the theme in your book, how you analyse what's going on right now.
Yeah, well, so a lot of the research I did, when you look at scholars like Andrew Davies, who writes books about the history of gang crime in Glasgow and Manchester, or Robert McKilwee, who's got volumes of stuff about the history of gang crime in Liverpool, what you see firstly is that this is not a new problem. Every generation pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's this same sort of sense of moral panic, this unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years, as have the sort of facile explanations of
And those social indicators are?
Poverty, domestic abuse, lack of education, so expulsion from school. So, for example, almost half the people in prison today in Britain were expelled from school as children, versus just 1% in the population as a whole. Among young people, about half the young people in young offenders institutes were at some point in care growing up, versus about 1% in the population as a whole. So social indicators have remained identical. Explanations, or what we call moral panics, this sort of idea that just having enough police or just having tougher sentences will work. A good friend of mine, Dr. Baz Dreisinger, did a PhD looking at prisons all around the world, and she didn't find any correlation anywhere between tougher sentences and reduction of crime.
So those people who analyse it as a race problem,
yeah,
these are black gangs, these are Asian gangs, these are...
This is fascinating. I mean, let's just look at the maths. There are 1.2 million black people in London. in a bad year, 50 of them will kill someone. That's less than 0.004% of the black population. Therefore, anyone that thinks that blackness is a sufficient common denominator for violent crime clearly doesn't even understand what a common denominator is. Just to contrast, in a bad year in Glasgow, say 2005, there were 40 murders. There were only 600,000 people in Glasgow. So that year, a Glaswegian as a whole was twice as likely to be killed as a black Londoner. Whereas the commonalities, when you actually look at the demography of violent crime, the commonalities remain the same in Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Naples, or London. Racial explanations are sort of way out for the powers that be, a way out for the wider society. And it's revealing that what happens in London is black on black crime, even when the person committing it is like me, has one white parent, one black parent. Okay, what happens in Glasgow, race is not important, or Liverpool, race is not important.
So let's look at the way the government is responding to this. Money, on the one hand, into very deprived areas, which have become more deprived thanks to cuts, presumably.
For sure.
And also denying that policing has anything to do with it.
I'm not, on that, I'm not entirely sure it does or doesn't. Is there any evidence that more police in and of itself will reduce violent crime? Secondly, let's not always believe that violent crime as a whole is on the increase. In 2005 in London, there were 180 murders. Last year, there were just 116. So we have to be very, very careful that the information is accurate, one, and that it's not being used to sort of just say, right, more police is going to solve the problem.
But what do you say to the Bobby on the beat who's absent these days, or when do you see a policeman on the beat?
Like I said, I don't think that's the issue. Having a police officer is not going to undermine the reason why some young people feel so desperate or disenfranchised or enraged that they are killing other young people. So you still need to get to the root causes of the reason, and the root causes are not going to be undermined simply by more police. You need to work with poverty, you need to work with domestic abuse, you need to work with different sociological and psychological factors, but I just don't think having more police on the beat is suddenly going to get rid of this massive...
But that takes money
problem.
and commitment. That means prioritising this end of crime.
And it means believing that the young people who are dying are important and valuable, and being willing to have a nuanced and human view of young people that do sometimes very, very bad things. When they come from a different sector of society, more affluent sector of society, or a more racially approved group, or at least if that's the perception, there is more willing to have a nuanced view of those people.
Can you divine what might be going through the mind of the stabber?
Again, I think that's a little bit too sensationalist, and I'm not perhaps in a position to sort of offer moral condemnation. I went through a period of my life where I carried a knife, despite the fact that I was a straight A student. Some of my friends went to prison for stabbing people or for shooting people, and some of them got stabbed and shot. I think at a very particular period in young people's lives, some young men from very particular circumstances feel a particular way and can do very, very bad things. But even when you look in those same areas, the same young person at 21 is a completely different person at 31. So even then, what we're really talking about is just in a key kind of set of years, how to pull people out of crime and violent crime just during those key years.
Akala, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Thank you.